All right, we're live. I've got our special guest back again, Jordan Myers from That's BS in Plato's Cave, some really cool YouTube channels. I also have joining us for the second time, Devin, and of course the guy who originally started this little series of ours, Jesse Mr. Rogers. So we're going to talk about a couple things today. We want to kind of wrap up our, see if we can get anywhere on our issue of Darwinian pragmatism, which I believe is mostly a language or definition issue, especially compared to how it's used compared to its definition. And then we'll see if we can get into some other deep issues like God and how to derive values from facts. I'll let the other guys just say something for a brief minute, introduce themselves, and just say anything that they might want to get to or anything, and then we'll get into it here in just a minute. So, Devin, since it's just your second time here, go ahead and you haven't really met Jordan before this, so go ahead and just introduce yourself, and then we'll get into it in a minute.
Definitely. It's nice to meet you, Jordan. We're, in the middle of audio stuff backstage and things like that. So, honestly, I don't really have anything succinct to say today about reintroducing myself. So, I'm very interested to get to I saw in a video that you wanted to really touch base for your fans and other people who watch this stuff about actually tackling your question of how to reconcile the Darwinian pragmatism that we're discussing and realism and other this or that other ways of looking at things like that. So yeah, I hope I'm constructive for that today. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, Jesse, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I am actually going to be trying my hand at being a medium writer. So you guys are going to see me
cool.
on too. I saw Isaac put out an article recently. So
yeah, a little while back.
Yeah, and so what I'm hoping to do is take my thoughts from whatever we're doing in these conversations and sort of over time digest it, because I think if last week was any indication of what's in store, I think there's just so much to try to make sense of, and so I'll be doing that on an ongoing basis. But yeah, my history is that I came into this mostly from the atheist position because I had left religion, and Sam Harris was sort of a beacon for me to grab hold of. But Jordan Peterson gave me the probably the strongest rebuttal of that kind of perspective that I had heard. So anyway, it's been an interesting ride so far, and Jordan's been great to talk to. So I look forward to keeping that conversation going.
Okay, Jordan. I guess I talk a lot, so I'm just going to let you say whatever you want for a couple minutes, and then we'll get into it. And I know you made a video a few days ago specifically getting at what we were sort of getting at last time. So I don't know if it might be good for you to kind of like do a short review on that and the issues that you and maybe your friends or your people on YouTube want to get to, and then we'll see what we can get to.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, thanks for that intro, and yeah, happy to be back talking with you guys. Last time was fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I won't do like a big intro because if people want to know about me, they can just look at the first live stream we did. But yeah, basically the short of it is I run Plato's Cave and That's BS, both podcasts. So yeah, Isaac, you hinted at it, but both from my audience and I think from several people got in contact with me from the Facebook page, which was really cool. And they really wanted us to sort of start this chat with two things that people seem to be kind of unsatisfied with on the last one. So the first thing is that I think we should abandon trying to kind of whittle back and forth, whittle down what Jordan Peterson or Sam Harris thinks about something and just talk about what we think about it. Right. Because I don't know if we can really make a lot of productive ground just trying to mince other people's words. I think we should just say what we believe and then evaluate that on its own claim.
Sure.
But so the two things that people wanted us to rectify from last time is, and you hinted at this video, was trying to clarify things for people. The definition, I guess we were playing a little fast and loose with the definitions of terms. So I made a video where I cited the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on realism and pragmatism.
Yeah.
So I just think last time we were being a little fast and loose with what pragmatism was and what it was not. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to clarify, because I kind of just feel the responsibility to, being like brought up in the philosophical literature to just clarify for the people listening that pragmatism, as an epistemology, which means how we come to know what we believe, is that you look at. So there's pragmatism generally, and then there's Darwinian pragmatism, which is a subsection of that, right? So pragmatism, generally speaking, says that whatever is useful, and utility or usefulness can be defined several different ways, hence there's different types of pragmatism, determines what is in fact true. So it's the opposite causation that most of us use in our daily lives, because I think most of us tend to be realists on most questions that we care about. But Darwinian pragmatism is a subset of that states that whatever is true is that which leads to the survival of the species. And I really wanted to harken on that a little bit, because last time we were talking in terms of what was useful for the individual, what was useful in terms of people's feelings, but it's a much narrower claim than that. Darwinian pragmatism definitionally says that whatever leads to the survival of the species is therefore true. So the only thing that I just wanted to ask is that if we want to defend Darwinian pragmatism, let's get the definition right. And if we want to defend something else, let's be clear that it's not Darwinian pragmatism.
Okay, sure. That's fine. Let me ask you a question to that end real quick, though.
Sure.
And we had exchanged a bit over Facebook and YouTube comments and whatnot this past week too. But can you think of any examples? And I know we're trying to mostly think in terms of ourselves and such, but can you think of any examples of people who are pure Darwinian pragmatists, mainly, but then also just anybody who is maybe you could say William James, 200 years ago or whatever, but I guess anybody in the last 100 years or so that is a Darwinian pragmatist, in the pure sense, only because this sort of, I don't know if you'd call it a debate or discussion, started out on the idea that some people, Jordan Peterson, for example, use Darwinian pragmatism, but not perhaps as it's defined, or they don't use it all the time, because the tricky thing is sometimes you say, if you're a Darwinian pragmatist, you have to be this way all the time. So I guess sort of like
I was saying it's question. Logically implied, not that people actually do it. There's a difference between those two. Yeah.
Sure. But does anybody do that though? I guess is my question.
No, it's
or should you?
Wait, no, you both don't and you shouldn't.
Well, I don't see what the problem is then. If you shouldn't take it that literally, then why should we? We should nail it down to have this is what it is. But then, like most of the stuff that he's talking about, you take what that is and then you read between the lines and play within the bounds of that definition or that theology or that idea that you're talking about, instead of staying rigid to the ideology or a definition of.
So I guess that's kind of where it seems. I don't know what the word is. It seemed almost, and I hate to be like I definitely respect everyone here and the viewers who asked the question, but it seems a little bit silly almost to get stuck on something that nobody ever uses. And
But it's not that no one ever uses it. It's that no one ever uses it completely. That's what you asked, right?
right. Okay. So on that, I guess sort of the follow-up question is to that. So what are some examples of that you see people using it at all in the past 100 years or so?
Oh, I mean, if we want an example of that, we can just talk about, Jordan Peterson's work,
Okay.
where he says, that which is, I mean, he states it pretty clearly in their podcast with Harris, but I guess it's not I guess my point is not whether or not we can find people who use examples of it somewhere. What I was trying to get at, and this is the other thing that the audience was not really satisfied with, is, well, okay, if you're not going to use pragmatism all the time, which I grant you that no one does, but there's a difference between a normative question and a descriptive question, right? Descriptively, no one uses it all the time. But then the question is, okay, well, should you use it all the time? And if not, how do you determine when to use another epistemology over that? So that's the question that we kind of didn't really get to end on. And
that's a fair question that we sort of got to or started to get to last week. And I think in the comments or a little bit of our correspondence in the last week, I just said that, at least in the example of Jordan Peterson, and again, we're
what about you though? What do you like? I'm asking you when you think we should use it versus not, because like I said, it's not. I don't want to say it's boring to discuss what Peterson thinks, but I don't know what exactly that adjudicates. I'm curious about what we think.
I have a thing that I think, if I don't mean to dominate the conversation or anything.
No problem.
Like
Go
that.
ahead if you have an example or whatever.
I think for, as an example in the way that they use it, but the way I understand it, because I really don't, I don't have enough broadness in the material of this level that I watch to compare to other people. But the way that I understand how to use that would be like, if it's pragmatism and it's based on if it's effective, its utility, then use pragmatism when it's effective, for one. And then whenever you are deciding to use that, you have to check it with realism, whether you believe, like realism to the extent that I think I understand more like the Newtonian view of just the objective way you look at things. But also like real for how most people would consider real, like being realistic with how you're using it, instead of like, for the sake of argument, we try to straw man it, we try to blow it up for concept's sake. But whenever you're using it in your life, to like extrapolate a truth from the Bible, or, you're trying to extrapolate it from just some proverb that is local to your area or something like that, different it's a whole different line of thought than whether or not something is like, I have a silver Mac, or what's the composition of, like some parts.
Let me see if I can give an example that I think would help. Jordan, in your video the other day, you gave the example of, I don't know if we'll get into that, or if it's helpful. I might have a better example, but you gave the example of aliens invaded the Earth, and we decided that they couldn't feel pain, and so since that was the case, it made people.
Well, it's not what we decided. Sorry, I wouldn't say that that's what we decided. I gave the example that.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
If 20 years from now aliens invade the Earth, right?
Okay.
And the world government tells the world's soldiers that to be ruthless and merciless when they combat the aliens, because in fact they can't feel pain, so it doesn't matter if you're brutal towards them. And telling the soldiers that actually gives them sort of the tenacity and the lack of mercy to win the battle, right? And so it results in the survival of the species. Now, from a Darwinian pragmatist standpoint, that means that it was that the aliens couldn't feel pain. Now, I'm not comfortable with using that epistemology in that example because it seems clear to me that the aliens could feel pain or they could not. And that fact is irrespective of what we believe about it.
Right. And so again, I think this is an issue with it's the definition issue, because the definition says true. So because someone said this and it led to the survival of the species, therefore we say that it's true.
Well, believing it led to the survival of the species, not just saying.
Right. So one thing that, and I was going to move to another example, but we can stay on this at least for a minute. But one point that I made in the YouTube comments was that it didn't actually. It's tricky because of the definition of Darwinian pragmatism is so tricky, but at least the way that I understand it, it's almost like. So a lot of these arguments of acting as if God exists leads to a better society in some ways, or some could argue. So not necessarily that it proves that God exists. Like you made the point last week, like you could, whether Yahweh exists or Yahweh doesn't exist, either way, you can kind of perhaps lead to a better even manipulation of the population and that sort of thing. So likewise, so that's kind of proving not necessarily that God exists, but it's proving that to some degree, having people, maybe not on an individual basis, but to some degree on a societal basis, there are benefits to acting as if there's a God.
Can I just be clear, though? That's not Darwinian pragmatism. And I think it's really important to stick to definitions. I actually agree with Peterson on this because to engage in postmodernism and to change definitions to what we want them to be is a pretty slippery slope and a dangerous game. So I would agree with Peterson that we should be really rigid with our definitions here. And if you want to defend something that you just claimed, that's fine. But I guess just we shouldn't call it Darwinian pragmatism. You can defend valuing usefulness on its own terms, right?
I think the way that I see it being used now that you say that is that instead of having it be something to know what is true, it's a tool more to know what is false. So, in the claim, it seems that it makes, I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm jumbling up my words, but it seems that Darwinian pragmatism makes the claim that you don't know what the true truth was until everybody dies, and only then you know what's false and stuff like that. That everything you did before that was false, and the truth was something else that you should have done that you didn't do this. Yeah. But that's how, that's the way you can always see what is false and use that to kind of guide your rudder toward what's less false. And I believe that's kind of how I've seen, it explained as an aside within like a lecture as an example before in a certain lecture.
The thing is to your point, Jordan, that there's just nobody who uses. Well, it's tricky. I was trying to get into a couple examples of how it's sort of used, but it's not really used the way that it's defined. And so I don't know if it's just that the definition is wrong, because nobody has, at least probably in the last 100 or almost 200 years since that it sort of came out, or no, it wasn't even that long. It's only since about the origin of species. So it's barely been around. It's never been used. And
it's never
been used by definition.
Yeah, but that's just not correct in the literature. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with Richard Rorty's work, but he was one of the most famous American pragmatists. He just died pretty recently, I think he might have passed away.
Pragmatism or Darwinian pragmatism?
Well, remember, Darwinian pragmatism is a subset of pragmatism. You could be many different types. But
right. But we're talking about specifically Darwinian pragmatism. Like,
sure.
I just don't see any examples of it ever being used at all, including Jordan Peterson, by definition.
So I don't know. So what exactly are you defending then? Because I'm just curious. Again, I don't want to squabble for hours over what Jordan Peterson thinks. I'm just curious.
I'm saying anyone on the planet ever in history has ever used Darwinian pragmatism by definition.
I thought that for about 4 hours of audio, Jordan Peterson and right, Peterson was claiming that it is, in fact, that's how he views the world. That when you're evaluating
he never says, I am doing this because I need to behave in a Darwinian pragmatist model.
What do you mean?
He was defending that when talking about the specific definition of truth, in that he values what capital T truth is to be, something that includes the subjective part of reality that is morally inclined, and that's a higher order truth than facts about objective reality. And then he makes the claim that the facts about reality that are scientific and stuff, or that are true on that local level, are derived from the subtexts of the theologies, or however he described it. And that's the big qualm with that. So
what he was saying, though, is that there's...
Who is he?
He's talking about
in Peterson, in the Sam Harris conversation that you're disagreeing with. And I feel like I've kind of lost a little bit of my train of thought somewhere in...
Yeah, I think we should break, yeah.
Not that, I don't feel like break, but like you tell me again.
Take a break,
yeah, for sure. If you guys can remind me where I was, or what you think of that now, or whatever.
What Jordan Peterson is getting at is, so to a degree, what you're saying is that there is, through he calls it a super meme, which is his own thing. It is not Darwinian pragmatism. He might have, like, there is times when he says the Darwinian pragmatists kind of thought this, and they kind of had this approach. And in a clip we looked at just before this, there's only about 2 minutes, he said, Jean Piaget was sort of a Darwinian pragmatist, and he sort of went this way. But the issue with the Darwinian pragmatists, and this is sort of quoting Jordan Peterson, or paraphrasing, is that they say you can never know truth. And he might be wrong about that per the definition that you read, but what they say is, because the world is so complicated, we can never know exactly what to do, but we still need to know how to act. We then just try to, and he used Piaget because, it's just like kids playing games. They don't even know all the rules, but they know how to play games together, even if they don't know the rules for the games. And so what we do pragmatically is we go into the world and we just figure out what we need to do enough to act. Now, what that and
that's how we did survive so far, and that's all the information that we know up to this point. So the best way to pragmatically use things is one way, but we have to use realism and our awareness of everything else that's going on to make sure that we don't jump off a cliff by doing that and cause racial injustice and cause harm and strife, and accidentally make a nuke of like a chemical reaction or whatever.
So there's going to be it's like the world is full of facts. The world is full of variables and factors, but it's like you mentioned racial injustice. It's like we don't know exactly how to solve a lot of our differences in the world, and so a lot of times what we do is we just figure out how to do something. Like these protesters that's going on right now. It's June 2nd right now, and they are right and wrong, because they should and do have the right to protest. Of course, the violence and all that is, and the law breaking is wrong. But what that they're doing is they figured out that they need to do something different, and they're doing what they know how to do. And of course, if you pull people out of that mob, everybody's going to have a different motive. And then on the other hand, people who are responding to that, whether it's people with a public voice or mayors, governors, the president, whoever, we don't know exactly what to do, but we do something. So that might not be Darwinian pragmatism. So I think that the tricky thing with Darwinian pragmatism is it's never done by definition. So it needs to either be redefined or
we could all just agree right there that we're not using Darwinian pragmatism, in that by definition we wouldn't just follow that, and so that's not what we're doing, and we could all just go, okay, yeah, it's useful if you use it pragmatically, but you can't use it by definition.
Well, and again, it's good to make the distinction. Pragmatism people use all the time. Like we use pragmatism when we, go to the store and make shopping decisions, or we, decide what to eat for breakfast. Pragmatism we use constantly, or almost constantly. Darwinian pragmatism, it's an interesting idea that sometimes it gets tossed around and sort of used here and there by different, people at different times. And it can be a useful tool if you use it, but it's not ever used as it's defined. It's used as something that helps us see things that are more useful and see things and find certain useful ideas. But it's tricky because in the definition it says truth, and then when you say truth, that implies other things are false, which isn't really the case. And that it's just like fiction, like Peterson sometimes makes that point that sometimes fiction is more true than nonfiction because of the stories that it can tell and the psychological changes that it can make by telling a story in fiction. So, like I said, it's and to your question that we were sort of getting into, which was when do you switch from Darwinian pragmatism or this version of it, whether it's a super meme theory or something like that, as Peterson sort of called it, was okay. In the case of Peterson, he only uses it to describe the dominance hierarchy. I sent you that chapter from his book last night. I know you didn't get the chance to read it, but that's when he really gets into it as far as how it relates to the dominance hierarchy.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
On that? Okay. So now I'm asking you guys a question, Devin and Isaac, what you think, not what Jordan Peterson thinks. So so we're using a ton of examples, and I think that's might be a little bit confusing. So let's just bring it back to the example you first brought out, Isaac, and let's just stick with that for a minute. So you first brought up the example I used from the video about the government telling soldiers that aliens couldn't feel pain, and because they believed it, that therefore they acted in a way that saved the species. Now, I'm curious, Devin and Isaac, and whichever one of you feels more strongly, I guess, can answer. But now, I don't think that you guys want to necessarily apply a Darwinian pragmatist framework to that question. I think you guys kind of want to say, well, obviously, the aliens.
That's evil.
Well, not even. I'm not. Let's not get into morality. Let's just talk about what's true, right? Obviously, it's either a fact that those aliens can feel pain or they can't. And that truth is irrespective of what the government tells its soldiers. Now, my question for you is, if you do want to evaluate that claim on a realist framework, I'm searching for a methodology by which you select realism as the epistemology you want to use over Darwinian pragmatism. And this is the question that we ended on and that people, I think, really want an answer from. I'm searching for a robust method of choosing between them. Yeah, Jesse?
But
yeah, I think there's a couple ways that we could think about this, but one of the things I wanted to do and before I give my answer was to play that clip that Isaac talked about. It's about 2 minutes, but it gives Peterson's summary of how he sees pragmatism. So I got the clip ready if you guys are okay with that.
Yeah, are you just going to play the audio?
I can't hear it, yeah.
I don't
well, because your previous idea there, your previous frame,
can you hear that now?
Microframe, let's say, doesn't.
Is it coming up or
it's
maybe
loud, but it's just not coming through clearly. Do you know what I mean?
Harsh. I watched it.
I've actually got it right here. It takes about 10 seconds or a minute and 10 seconds to play.
Jordan's got
So,
yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about the essential philosophical contradiction between a Newtonian worldview,
which is just another term for realism,
which I would say your view is nested inside, and a Darwinian worldview, because those are not the same. I mean, the Darwinian view, as the American pragmatists recognized, so that was William James and his crowd, recognized almost immediately, was a form of pragmatism. And the pragmatists claim that the truth of a statement or process can only be adjudicated with regards to its efficiency in attaining its aim.
So he laid out there basically what I was saying, that Darwinian pragmatism is a form of pragmatism generally, but that it adjudicates a truth claim. That means it determines whether it's true or false based on whether the claim satisfies the conditions. And for Darwinian pragmatism, that means, does it lead to the survival of the species or does it not? But we've talked about definitions enough. I just wanted to make it clear that Peterson does actually evaluate it on that merit. But my question to you guys is, if we want to be, circumspect philosophers here, when do we determine which framework to use? Because otherwise we're just, I don't know what we're doing, but it's not a structured game we're playing then.
Well, are you the soldier in the situation that you gave us, or are you the person giving the orders, or are you the people getting shot at?
Would that change whether or not the aliens could feel pain?
Yeah, that's what he's getting at, is truth claims, which I think is, again, tricky because it goes into this. I think it's just
it doesn't
really
overall.
defined.
It doesn't. It's a different.
Yeah.
It's a truth claim that's more local to, the aliens or whatever that we're talking about, and them lying to you about it doesn't make it actually true in that sense.
Okay, so question for you, Devin. Question. So, even though it leads to the survival of the species, you don't want to evaluate it on Darwinian pragmatist claims. And I agree with you. But my question to you is, why do you want to use realism there over Darwinian pragmatism? That's my question.
So Peterson made the point that it's he what he was just saying in that clip you played is they're what do you say, the Newtonian view is nested inside of what he says is like a Darwinian or Darwinian pragmatic view, which makes sense in that the way that we live, especially because we look at our history, it's just a drop in the bucket. The history that we know over the past, hundreds of years, thousands of years, and then from there we're just kind of looking at, bone fragments and carbon dating and whatnot. I'm not denying any of the history that's out there, but there's so much guesswork that goes into trying to make sense of everything. But even though we don't know exactly what happened for the millions or billions of years that life has been on this earth, we try to make sense of it. And
sorry, Isaac, what does that have to do with the question of whether we can tell the aliens feel pain or not?
Well,
so
for me to answer your question, I think I have my answer.
Okay.
Is that you use it local to the thing. So whether or not soldiers were told or leaders told soldiers a truth claim that local to the aliens, whether or not they feel pain is true or not there. But that isn't inside of that true fact about that is not inside of the domain of interchange of what's going on between the people just doing what they're doing, they're aliens, and the people up in space and stuff. So, pragmatically it works for the people up in space to, mow them down and continue their species. But if I were ever, but if I were ever to find out after the fact that, they were able to feel pain the whole time, then I would just have PTSD and shit would be terrible because now I'm the soldier and local to me, my pragmatic paradigm has been shattered. So if I was a soldier at that point, I would have wanted to use realism to be like, are these guys fucking shitting me? Am I really going to mow down these monsters or these like aliens that can feel pain or not?
Stuck on this for 2 hours.
But that's what I think your question is, the direction that you're trying to lead me to. And I think
that's a pretty important question.
Isaac, I think I'm on Jordan's track with his question. I don't think you're on track with Jordan's most recent question, and I don't know if that's on track with the overall thing of what we're trying to do. It's
another hour to get anywhere with it, because nobody has ever used Darwinian pragmatism the way that it's defined. That's
not what I'm asking, though. Well, I'm asking, and I think Devin,
why would I use
it that way? Nobody uses it that way, so we're going to be stuck on it forever because you want us to surrender to a definition just because it's defined that way. But nobody uses it that way.
I would only use Darwinian pragmatism if it was about a truth claim of, like if it involved, something, I don't know, it would have to be involved with some sort of moral framework in what I could tell.
Can I clarify? Actually, my question isn't narrowly about Darwinian pragmatism, but it includes it. My question is, and I think why
Devin would I think of the aliens as?
Go ahead.
I think Devin might think it's an important question to ask.
I just don't want to get hung up on it for another half an hour or an hour.
Sure, but I think it's important because if I don't know how you're determining which epistemology you use, then how do I know?
We never used Darwinian pragmatism ever.
I thought you said Peterson. I thought you said that he did in one of your YouTube comments on the dominance hierarchy.
Well, but pragmatism
doesn't use it as defined ever.
Let's broaden out to just pragmatism as William James uses it for a moment.
Sure.
And because that's who Peterson invokes, and that's who he references as at least informing his view.
Sure.
Even if it's not strictly the same. So. In the lecture that I wanted to play, sorry I didn't work out with that, but the idea with that is that within the realm of reliable knowledge, you can optimize that limited game, and that's basically what you're doing with pragmatism, because you never can know enough to really act with the fullness. The realism you're talking about doesn't exist for us because the universe is just too big. We can't know every aspect of truth. We can think we know truth. That's the most we'll ever get, is that we can think with very high confidence that we know truth. But to reductio ad absurdum, this thing, we could all be brains in jars, having hallucinations, and none of this could be real, right? So we have no way of disproving these things. We can just be 99.99% whatever we assign to it. But that's the challenge for us as participants in the universe, is that we can't know realism. Realism is beyond our reach, right, in the sense that we don't know whether the aliens feel pain. We can think we know, and that's as much as we could ever get. There could be a truth about it. There could be a truth, but that truth isn't necessarily accessible to us, which forces us within the realm we can work with to sometimes use pragmatism, but that's generally within the known limited games. So that's how my answer would be to differentiate when to use which. I do want to get into hierarchies because I'm with Isaac. I am kind of worn out on this. So if we could move on,
we could do this for like 30 hours and it wouldn't go anywhere. I honestly don't think it would, because we're stuck on the definition that nobody uses as it's defined, and it's used in this nesting sort of way, because what we do, whether we're talking about psychology stories and really, when I started with the alien thing, I was saying right from the gate, I hate this example. I addressed it in the YouTube comments. It's too hypothetical. I wanted to get to another example.
Can I use a historical one then?
Well, let me ask you, what was your feedback on what my comment was, Jordan?
Yeah, I actually liked that comment, and I just to make it clear, the reason why I would like to know the answer to my question is because when we're talking about other things, right, I am not sure, for instance, when Isaac might employ a pragmatist viewpoint or when he might employ a realist viewpoint. And that difference...
We all
Sorry,
do
can I
both
finish?
every day. We all do both every day. And I addressed this in the Facebook comments that we had a week ago, that what we do is and I gave some examples from Ray Dalio's book that he put out a year or two ago. That's actually really good. It's very practical, but he's talking about how to use really both things in our everyday life. And so what that we do is we look at what's worked, we look and we make a plan, and then we put that plan into action. And we know that in most likelihood, whatever plan we put into action will fail. But what that is that's life's test to it. And then and part of that life's test to it, so to speak, is it's like an evolutionary test of an idea or the plan that you put into act, whether that was for your family life, for your business, personal life, or whatever. It gets ridiculous when you get down to this species stuff because you can never know. But you put the and Jordan Peterson often uses that terminology. He says, like mosquitoes are examples of bad ideas because their answer to the evolutionary problem is they lay about 1 million eggs and they just need one to survive out of 1 million. Whereas, humans, we, don't give birth a lot compared to mosquitoes, for example. So rather than that, we have to use our brains and use our sociability and everything else to make sure that we survive. So life is the test. And what you do is you put in a plan, you put it into the framework of life. And then the other way that I answered that last week is that in the example of Peterson, just as an example, he only uses it in reference to the dominance hierarchy. He never, ever, ever uses it in any other context other than the dominance hierarchy producing stories that he sort of loosely calls a super meme. Mm-hmm. But that's the only area that he uses it. He says, okay, these stories have been useful for this long, and so now what do we do with that?
So just to be clear, you are saying that some people do use Darwinian pragmatism sometimes, because before you said that
nobody ever uses it by definition.
Okay.
Not by definition, by a loose non-definition that maybe somebody needs to make a new terminology for it. But by definition, there are zero examples of anybody ever using it the way that it's defined.
Okay. I would just say that if listeners want to, the clip I played where Peterson says that he does use Darwinian pragmatism.
He might say that he uses it or he believes it or that he has a framework or that there's Newtonian thinking is nested inside of Darwinian thinking. But he never ever uses it as defined. Defined would be that he. And this sort of gets into some other topics that we talked about as far as if that there is a God or not, which is one area it would be that if he said that these stories proved definitively that we know that there's a God. And part of the reason that he will not answer that question definitively is because the stories do not prove that definitively. They probably prove that you behave better. And that's why sort of the example that I wanted to give, if we're going to, stay on this. Is
Can I answer Jesse's question?
Sure.
I was in the middle of it before. But Jesse, I think you were sort of trying to kind of get at why it was important to me to figure out what epistemology we were using. And that's a good question. I just wanted to be able to give a full answer to it. The reason why I guess I'm concerned to know when we want to use, because as Isaac said, at least in his life, he thinks that we use both, right? Pragmatism and realism. So if we do use both, what I'd like to know is how you determine when you use either. Because if it's a post hoc exercise where you make up your mind and then you look back and say, well, the answer I want conforms to a pragmatist viewpoint, so I'm going to use that. I want to evaluate a claim based on its utility. Or you look back and you say, well, I really care about the answer, so I want to know if it's actually true, irrespective of what I think. If we don't have a robust way to determine which we're going to use before we've already figured out what we think, then I think that's a huge problem. And for instance, if I were to ask, if we, this is an example, I don't want to move on to it yet, but if Isaac asks, is there a God? I don't know what framework he wants to use. Does he want to evaluate whether God exists based on whether it's useful to, or whether or not there is actually a God? And knowing what framework you want to use beforehand and giving reasons why is important, because otherwise we're just doing post hoc rationalization. Does that make sense, Jesse?
It does. As we discussed last time, I'm skeptical that humans are very often able to achieve anything without post hoc rationalization. I think that's generally our modus operandi. And so, but I'm probably more okay with it than you are. And the reason why is because I see our existence as sort of being like going through a hazy, foggy, dark forest with just a little candle, and so, yeah, we're going to make a lot of mistakes. We're going to get a lot of things wrong, and we're not going to know why we're going where we're going and doing what we're doing most of the time. And so I think we've sort of evolved with the capacity to, even our what look like our shortcomings, even our ad hoc thinking and rationalization. This is the robust part, if there is one, of what Jordan Peterson is trying to say, is that maybe there is a reason for that too. Maybe there is something valuable and true about that. Even what looks like our flaws could be serving us. And so it's beyond us individually and even collectively as a species to be able to really know the answer. I'm really that part. I'm pretty sure. The only thing I'm sure about is that we can't really be sure about anything. So
yeah,
go ahead, Isaac.
I would say that has a lot to do with why that we are so highly psychologically evolved, because we just have all of these potentialities, and not in every way, in that we can swim really well, we can run really well, we can climb to the top of most trees, most of us, and that's just in the physical environment, and also in our social environment. And the reason is because when there's a new human being in the world, a baby, what that they have to do is just go out and try stuff, because it's not like you're programmed with like, this is going to be your environment. You don't know what kind of human beings that you're going to be around, whether you're going to be around gentle humans or abusive humans, and animals that might be around, and so then, because that we're built that way, that we've just got all these potentialities, whether we're going to be good swimmers, good tree climbers, whatever, that our environment is going to be physically and socially and everything else, we have to do what we're just saying, is go out and just do stuff. And some of that doing stuff is just going to be like, do it and then figure out why that some of it was good and some of it failed. And then that's also, like I was saying a minute ago, how that we go through our everyday life of like, we try to plan out, here's what I'm going to do for, this business, for my family, whatever. And then sometimes those things fail. And then we do both. We do it from a pragmatic perspective and a rationalistic, before, during, and after. Some of it very consciously and some of it unconsciously. That's just how that we work. And it's how that we've always worked. And it's tricky because it's a little bit fast and loose for most people, that we just go through and do it. And but that's just how human beings work, and that we've always worked, and we probably will for the foreseeable centuries.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I think I've said this at this point, but I just if we want to determine whether something is true or not, because you gave examples of starting a business and those are kind of they're sort of low level examples of just people trying to be effective in the world, right?
Well, it's examples of how that we think, using pragmatism and realism.
Yeah. So what I'm asking about is, when we're concerned with figuring out what is factual or what is true, which are like the deepest questions that we're concerning, because we're not discussing how to run a business right now. We're trying to figure out whether or not something is true. And
is it the same thing as factual?
Yeah, truth and factuality are the same in my mind. They're just synonyms. What I'm asking though is, so if we move on to the topic that you want to get to, my question is, how do I know whether you're using a pragmatic framework to determine whether God exists, i.e., if it is useful to believe in God, then God exists, or whether you're using a realist framework, which is, I don't care what people think about this. I just want to look if there's evidence for God's existence or not. And short of you telling me that, why would you? So my question is, if you're trying to figure out what's factual, right? Because I mean, presumably, if you die or are close to dying, you're kind of concerned about whether you're going to go to heaven or not. How do you determine and when to use realism on that question then?
Which game are you playing?
Well, I'll try to say briefly that I think this goes into our point that Jesse was making last week with something like pi as an example, where you don't say what it is. You say this is a irrational number. So same thing with we'll get into that a bit, perhaps, as well as the idea of how we get values from facts, which I think is what I was more interested in. But we'll just see how it all goes. But with all of that, it's sort of like the pragmatic thing where you say, nobody can ever say, they might be able to say, I feel in my heart, or I know because of a lot of subjective evidence, but nobody can ever say, there's a infinite number of things that we can never say, I objectively know for sure this is the truth and this is what it is, and objectively this is the thing this is the fact. But you can say, per my experience and per my leap of faith that I want to take, this is what I'm going to put my belief in, which is sort of, again, that same thing that we do with life, whether it's and I think a business.
Can I ask about that?
Sure, go ahead. Because
we keep jumping from example to example, but I want to stick on one for a second. So you just said that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but did you just remark that whether or not someone finds it comforting to believe in God, that has no bearing on whether God exists? Do I understand you correctly?
Well, that gives to the utility of acting as if God exists, but
it doesn't. Can I ask?
The utility of acting as if God exists, not if he exists, but if your behavior is going to perhaps be better in one way or the other, and or your subjective feeling is going to be better. But there's no way that we can ever, right? But there's no way we can ever know that thing. That's why we've been struggling with this idea for centuries or millennia, and we'll never know.
Can I ask, though, just straightforwardly, do you think that how someone feels based on their belief in God determines in any way, shape, or form whether that God is true or not?
Well, again, that is not a possible thing to know. Nobody will ever know if God exists.
That's not the question, though. What I'm asking is, does your feelings on whether a God exists or not actually determine if the God exists or not?
No, but there's nothing that will lead to this ABC, whatever. No epistemology will say we definitively, objectively know that there's a God.
That's not what I'm asking, though. I'm not. I think you're getting the question, does God exist, confused with the question of, does believing in God give him a reason to believe he exists?
What I'm saying is, whatever epistemology you use, like right now you're trying to say, does believing in God equate we know there's a God, or there's nothing that equals we know that objectively know that there's a God. It's
I'm not making that point. I'm just asking you. I'm
answering you that it's impossible for any epistemology to yield that answer.
Well, if you believe that nothing can give us insight, then why ask the question?
Nothing can give us insight to a subjective or an objective answer to a metaphysical question. So, in other words, there are metaphysical things that we can never say objectively for sure what the answer is. So we will not factually know there is a God or not, but
wouldn't you know if you died?
We don't know that. Nobody knows that.
Well, presumably, if I die in the next 30 seconds and I go to heaven, I would know that there is a God.
That's
right?
That's a assumption or presupposition, but
I don't think it is. So
no, it's the nature of God.
Sorry, what was that, Jesse?
It depends on the nature of God.
Right. We don't that's assuming that you know the nature of God or the nature of the metaphysical afterlife universe might be something like that. We have no idea. It could be reincarnation. There's a million possibilities that we don't know.
Okay, that's the key. So you're saying the truth about what happens when we die is a truth that is not contingent on what any of us think about it, right?
No, I'm saying that it's unknowable.
No, okay.
It's a statement of faith.
Okay, so is there ever a time when you do know it?
No, it's always a statement of faith for everybody. Okay,
so if you died and you went to the Christian heaven, you still wouldn't know if Yahweh was real?
But that's a metaphysical assumption.
No, I'm asking you. If you did in fact die.
That's a complete hypothetical.
Well, most people who are Christians don't think it's actually hypothetical. They do
right,
think.
But they are making that statement of faith. It's not that they have objectively made that's objectively a proven fact just because that they make that belief, but no one will ever objectively know.
So if you go to heaven, you don't know that God exists? I don't understand that.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's a complete hypothetical. So like what you're saying right now is a statement of complete hypothetical faith.
No, I don't have any faith that it's true or not. I'm asking, how do you ever adjudicate whether a belief is right or wrong then? Because you're saying that we can never know. But
so I can know that I have this bottle of water in my hands.
Okay.
I can objectively show it to you.
Mm-hmm.
But if I wanted to say right here I have an imaginary bottle of water, it is just completely whether
that's
you want
a strange claim. How? Yeah, that's a weird one.
Okay, let's say I'm going to say that I have a ghost right here.
Mm-hmm.
The ghost of my dead great-grandfather, and maybe I really believe it,
mm-hmm.
but it's still not an objective proof that I can.
Okay, that's perfect then. So you're saying
a faith.
So are you saying that it's either a sort of a reincarnated ghost or not, irrespective of what you believe, or do you believe that what you think about that actually determines what it is?
No.
The second can be true. The placebo effect is evidence.
But it wouldn't make an actual ghost, right?
No, not with a ghost necessarily.
Like
but
ectoplasm.
there are cases where your belief in something is the thing that makes that something real, and so placebo effect is one of them.
Projection.
Wait, but to be clear though, the placebo effect is called the placebo effect because it's a lack of the other medical treatment, right? Believing that you got the other medical treatment doesn't mean that you did.
No,
right.
But it causes a psychophysiological healing in some cases.
Okay, but then you're changing the definition of like what we mean here. So if I ask you, did you take hydroxychloroquine or not? And you were part of a double-blind study that either gave it to you or not, but they obviously tell you that you did, right? Does your belief that you took hydroxychloroquine actually determine whether you did? I understand that you think that it can give you, positive effects, but does that determine whether it was a salt capsule or hydroxychloroquine?
No, I'm
determines the healing.
Yeah, that's a clear answer, Jesse. Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
hear what Jesse said.
What did you say, Jesse?
He said no.
I said a flat out no. I'm not going to go to that level of.
Right.
I think it's a little crazy to go to think that our
Well, that's
belief.
what I'm asking. Yeah.
But that's a different domain. I'm sorry. Excuse me.
But what I'm saying is that functionally speaking, for human beings existing in the world,
Mm-hmm.
you don't get that kind of, it's like you just said, it's a double blind that we're dealing with here. And that's our lives. Our lives are double blind. We don't know what the hell is going on.
Right.
So what Jordan Peterson's been trying to do is give people tools, say, don't necessarily, and Nietzsche did the same thing. And, lots of other people have done the same thing where they're just trying to give people tools and say, make something out of your life. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the thing that you make out of your life is going to be the absolute truth, and it'll
be something.
It'll be something better than what you started with when you were just sitting there wondering what could be in the world rather than going out and finding out. Right. And that's the value of experience, and that's the value of creating yourself into something, and that's where his emphasis all is. So. Yeah. It's not that he has a fixation on a particular epistemology. I think it's really important to get that. Mm-hmm. That's why he's not. That's why he doesn't necessarily feel. I'm guessing so badly about going back and forth from one way of thinking about it to another way of thinking about it. He uses many perspectives all the time, not a single epistemology that he knows will always work. I don't think he thinks anything.
And he gives examples of multiple religions. Like he'll draw the example of how Buddhism is very similar to Christianity, and their stories, and generally how the people act if that they act as if that they're true, or they put their faith in them. So.
Can I bring in the live chat for a second? Because Randu's been asking a question. I want to understand, Isaac, what you think is wrong with his statement. He says, if God exists, then God exists regardless of what I believe or don't. I find that statement to be extremely reasonable, and that's the same statement I would issue. What do you think is wrong with that?
No, I don't think anything's wrong with that. So
you said before we couldn't know.
No, but he's not saying that we know. He's saying if God exists, mm-hmm. then he exists regardless. And it would be the same thing if we say, if God does not exist, he does not exist regardless of our belief.
Okay, that's great. Can I ask the question then?
Sure.
So that's a realist framework. Now, how did you decide to use that over a pragmatist statement that could be said as follows? God exists because when I believe he does, it brings value to my life. Why did you just determine? Yeah,
so I think this is the whole problem that we got a little stuck and frustrated on with the definition. Is that okay?
Wait, but how do you answer those questions though? Because you said that you didn't find anything wrong with what Radu said. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that.
That's fine.
But how do you determine that though? Because you just accepted a realist framework, and then you didn't fully dismiss the pragmatist framework. So do you want to have it both ways, or what's going on here?
Okay, so I think this is exactly where that we're getting stuck, is that we say that, like, okay, because we found it useful, and this is the problem with the pragmatism sort of definition, or the language in the definition, is that it says, because this was useful, it's true. And that's not really the case. It's that it's true enough. And so it's
okay. So you're saying, just to clarify then, are you saying then that if someone gets value from believing in God, that has nothing to do with whether he's real or not? I think that's what you just said, but I want to clarify.
Well, yes, but to clarify, what that does though is it shows the value. So it shows that,
which is a different question than whether or not he's real.
Right, but again,
okay.
I don't know about how this compares to other people here, Jordan Peterson or Radu and others. Is I just don't see this whole thing of, I don't see the value in disputing God's existence, because even if I use all these different epistemologies and I say, hey, look, God's real, I've only proven it to myself.
So why did you want to talk about it?
Oh, just because it was a subject that we had discussed, and
But if nothing we can say makes any sense, then why bother talking about it?
It's not that it doesn't make any sense. It's that it doesn't objectively prove that. So
what would prove it for you? That, for instance, Yahweh is real. Is there anything that could prove his existence?
It's a subjective experience. So
what does that mean?
That means that it's
how could God subjectively be real, but then you're just not sure of whether he's objectively real?
It depends on the locality and the level.
Your belief is based on a subjective. Your belief is going to be. You can't get there by reason. It's only going to be faith.
The thing
you can get there by evidence.
The things that exist subjectively don't necessarily have to exist transsubjectively to exist on the level of the subjective.
Can you put that in English? Just kidding.
I mean,
what he's saying is there are many things that are subjectively experienced and objectively they're objective or subjective knowledge, and they might also. So just for the example of God, because it fits to what he was just saying, is you could subjectively say I believe in God. You could subjectively say my great grandfather's ghost is here, but that doesn't make it objective
or transsubjective, if that's a different thing.
That's fine. I'd rather just deal in terms of subjective and objective. So then which do you actually care about more? What is subjectively true, which just could be anything, right? I mean, I could subjectively think that like literally anything. I could believe the most insane proposition subjectively, but what I care about is what's objectively true. How do you split that baby, to use a biblical metaphor?
I think I have maybe something that can build on what Devin was talking about as far as subjectivity, because let's say that there's, let's use the example of a court case where there is an objective truth of what really did happen.
Yeah.
There's also the subjective truth of what people feel happened or believe happened, or what their lives have led them up to that point to believe. And then there's the trans-subjective, which is what ultimately the process as it comes to its completion decides, not from necessarily a single individual, but collectively on the entire process. So I think there is that.
So you have
to obliterate that distinction of trans-subjectivity.
That's great, Jesse.
So you can't operate within trans-subjectivity if you want to find really, really hard objectivity. But it's so hard to find the hardest objectivity that, really all we can say is that we have trans-subjectivity, because I'm not a full-on biologist and I don't look at, cells. I've only learned it in a school system that may or may not be lying to me to control me. And then also like just my experiences that it's working the way everybody's telling me and everybody's on the same page transsubjectively, but we may not all be objectively true until we can prove it or not. And I believe in the Harris and Peterson talk that Peterson makes the statement that the same thing in the objective realities, that when the science learns that it's not true subjectively, that you have to go back and rewrite the science and be like, oh, ether wasn't right and gravity, local to, the earth does exist and stuff like that. So
which do you guys care most about then in the court case, to stick with the example? I care the most about the objective truth. Which do you guys care the most about?
Well, see, the thing is that we can't always get to a...
That's not... But what do you care about, though?
I would like the objective truth, but I highly doubt we would be able to get to the objective truth.
But we want to just have to get to it, though.
For sure. We want to fight for that shit.
Okay. I'll give you the most honest answer I can give, which is that I want to care about the objective. I don't see a way around my falling into the subjective.
Okay, that's totally fair.
I think we have to come out of the subjective to figure out the objective, and that's the experience point of view of how Peterson was trying to explain in that conversation with Sam Harris about the beliefs of how we got here to where we got our science. We had to have those behind us because that's how we operate in it. It's like
well,
excuse me, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
I think what happens in court is the whole reason that we have a court, like, okay, often most cases don't even go to trial because they strike a deal beforehand.
Sure, but that's not that's not the central claim of what we're talking about. Do you care about whether courts find, as we want to strive for objective truth when it really matters, right?
Sure.
Okay. Wait, Isaac, though?
There's also other levels of subjective and objective truth because, like, God may not exist as the dude in the sky that everybody seems to make fun of thinking, but he does exist as a story, and he does exist as the thing that I saw in an acid trip, and he does exist on many different levels that do exist to me and that other people can experience transsubjectively and have a similar thing. And that the belief I'm sorry. I definitely got sidetracked with that, but
because I think Jesse brought up that's a perfect example, Jesse. So I'm not getting a clear answer from Isaac on what he wants the court to strive.
You have to give me about 90 seconds.
Sure. I don't think I interrupted.
Okay. So where the interruption was that I said not all cases go to court, and the reason is because they strike a deal beforehand. So they say that they have an objective truth, whether that's that somebody pled guilty or they dropped the case or whatever. The reason that they go to court is because they don't believe that they were able to get that objective truth beforehand. So then they fight out for the objective truth, or as close to that they can get it to it as possible. Then the point in a criminal case, for example, is let's put it against a jury of 12 or the jury of the peers, and let it be decided by judge and jury. Now, I think the question was, what's more important? So the important thing is to get as close to the truth as we can. But if we can't have the objective truth, then we get as close as we can, and that's why that a lot of cases end in acquittal, is because we can't find guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And so the case is thrown out, and maybe it's retried or whatever. But so we try to get as close as we can, but it's really important that we don't have this wishy-washy, true enough when we're talking about somebody's life or those type of things. And so sometimes in a court case, you can get to a definite, okay, by all intents and purposes, this person intentionally killed that person, so they're going to jail for a long time or whatever. We want the objective truth, but if we can't get it, we want to get as close to it as we can. But the important thing with court, for example, is to not stop halfway. Like, that's why you end up with a hung jury, is they're like, you've got one jury undecided or one juror going the other way. And that means that there's a reasonable doubt. So it's as close as we can get without there being a reasonable doubt. Otherwise, at least in the example of a court case, you've got to throw it out and retry it or whatever.
So the 2-second version of that is yes. We want to strive for objective truth above all.
As much as we can, yeah.
Okay. Well, then, so in a court case, presumably, that would really matter to all of us. So when it matters most, we want to strive for objective truth. So could you give an example of when we actually value subjective truth over objective truth then?
If you're the one that's on trial, you're not as interested in the objective truth then. You're interested in the subjective truth.
Yeah. So only when it's for immoral aims?
Isn't that the same answer as what I was trying to get at with the aliens earlier?
No.
The framework of if you're the alien or if you're the soldier or if you're the people giving the orders.
That's close enough. I think the thing that I'm scared about with that answer, though, Devin, is that just seems like it's sort of a Mad Max whatever goes then, right?
Well, that was the example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, well, I'm
Yeah.
saying, the more we value subjective truth and care less and less about
Mhm.
objective truth, kind of a slippery slope from there. I mean,
Well,
we kind of our
sure.
best institutions are built upon adjudicating what actually is the case as opposed to what people think.
Okay, this is exactly why that we have hierarchies of values and hierarchies of what goes into action. So would everyone here agree, at least the four of us, that it is good for a free society like America to have freedom of religion?
Yeah,
I would, but I have a question for Jordan when you finish.
sure.
No, I mean that. Well,
Was that like a gotcha question?
no. It wasn't.
Okay.
It wasn't a gotcha question, but it's that we have. We value each other's. That's an example to your question a minute or two ago, which is that we value each other's subjective beliefs as long as that it's within other values such as nonviolence. So, in other words,
Sure.
if we have a society full of people that believe 500 or 500 different religions, that will obviously include a lot of subjective belief. That's fine, and we value it as long as it's done in a humanitarian sort of way and nonviolent.
Sure.
And, anyway, go ahead, Jesse.
So just real quick, sorry, Jesse. I have a hard stop at 9:30. I forgot to mention that before. Sorry. Go ahead, Jesse.
Okay, that should be hopefully enough time to get this through. But this is something that we kind of all took for granted. But I want to know your answer of why should we objectively prefer, or why should we prefer the objective truth in a court case? What's the reason for that?
I mean, because we care about what is true when it's most important. It's kind of a weird tautological question.
It seems, but there's an idea within that I want to play with, and once I tease it out, I think you'll notice something there, which is that I think there is a pragmatic assumption that we're smuggling into this, which is that the healthy society is one that is most closely aligned with objective truth. The further you get away from objective truth in your court systems, let's say, and you start executing innocent people, and you start letting guilty people go, when you're far away from the objective truth, you've entered a state of dysfunction, right? So that's why we instinctively we seek objective truth for pragmatic reasons.
I totally agree with what you said, but I would never call that pragmatism, because you yourself said it's objectively true that when we live in societies like this, then people tend to be happier. And that's what I would value.
You value the happiness, but you value that because there is a utility in being happy and having a happy society, right?
Yeah, we're getting a little close to
because some societies weren't just happy like this. Some societies were happy because they were murderous and because they can, rape 13-year-olds and get away with it and stuff like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't be comfortable with saying though that that's a good society.
I know, me neither.
Right.
But they were happy.
It's far from objective truth, though. That's the problem, is that they've drifted very far from objective truths. You have to believe that was not inflicting suffering, and there's all sorts of things that you would have to.
And you could objectively say that I don't know if I even want to say a child, but you could objectively say that if a guy raped a woman, for example, it made him happy. And so this gets into the issue maybe we'll get into in a week or two or whatever, because I know we're going to wrap it up here soon. But we have facts, and then we try to derive values from those. And that's sort of how you get to an ought from an is, which is a whole other thing that maybe we'll get to another time. But
yeah, I don't think 7 minutes is enough to to unpack the is-ought distinction.
Well, we're getting into the issue of our value structures and where they come from, and they don't just come from objective facts. They come from experience. They come from being baked into us, our physiology. and they come from a myriad of different ways, and so that's a whole other thing. But
yeah, I just want to clarify.
It's not all objective. Some of it is subjective, and some of it is it's the thing about calling it pragmatic is just that the word or pragmatism, whether it's Darwinian or not, it's in the definition. It says it's true because it works. When I think that's just a poor definition. It should say something more along the lines of it's more useful or it's true enough, which is often something that Jordan Peterson says is it's true enough because it works.
Yeah, I just, I want to say though that, I mean, if we want to respect like the institutions that, kind of govern these debates, I mean, if you want to write to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and say, this is not the definition I want it to be, then, that's fine. But I think we should just, I mean, this is, like I said, something I agree with Jordan Peterson really strongly on, is that we mess around with the definition of words at our peril, and we should be really careful about doing it.
Well, again, that is putting it into practice, whether you want to call that practicality or pragmatism or whatever you want to call it. If you put it into practice and nobody uses it the way that it's defined, like I don't know if anybody listening at any point in the next week shows me examples of people using pragmatism the way that it's defined, where it gives you an absolute truth claim, cool, but I haven't really seen those. The way that it's used.
You're pointing out an issue with Darwinian pragmatism. Then that's a great point to make, and you should, juxtapose that with what you actually want to believe.
Well,
if I call myself, a socialist, and you say, "Wow, that's kind of weird," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, but what I mean by a socialist is a totally laissez-faire economy." That's kind of, it's like, well, what? Yourself a socialist at that point, and I say, well, because in practice, I'm really this kind of, it's just we should be. I think I just want to push for being more circumspect with.
Well, no, we do that all the time. Like we
whether we do it doesn't make it right, though, right?
It's the same thing happens constantly. Like people say that they're capitalist, but in a our Keynesian system, it's a hybrid of capitalism and socialism.
Shouldn't they be more clear then?
If you can define it more clearly than that.
Well, we can, because Isaac just did. He said, I would support a mixed market economy, right? We can be more clear.
Right, but I'm saying people do that all the time. But
does that make it right to do?
Well, we've got 4 minutes before the hard deadline here. These are some big questions that maybe we could do.
To answer your question, I don't think it's right, but that's what you have to deal with.
Yeah,
sure.
That's what's in the environment.
My hope is, though, that in conversations like this, if we can't do it here, then I'm sort of pessimistic about if we can do it anywhere.
I just don't know how you would go about the process of making a new definition. So I'm just not educated enough to give you what you're looking for.
Also,
sure.
My point was that's how that we behave, and maybe it's wrong. And there's a lot of things that people do that are wrong, like they call themselves capitalists or socialists when really what they support is something, whether you want to call it Keynesian or mixed market. You could say that they're wrong because they are wrong in their definitions or whatever, although that's a lot of times how that we've updated our language. Our language has evolved tremendously over the past.
Very slowly, though. That's also a key.
Well,
is language objective, or is it trans-subjective, or is it subjective? I mean, what do you think, Jordan?
I don't think there's like a platonic sense of the word green or the word capitalist. I mean, that makes no sense. So it's I guess we want to be
there's connotations.
And so it's trans-subjectivist in that sense, but I guess I'm just not very comfortable with an extremely loose version of that, because I think, a lot of the problems, and I would hope that part of what the Facebook group is aiming to do is to be really clear about what we're claiming, and to explain ourselves fully. Well,
it's sort of like inflation. If you have a lot of inflation, then suddenly your currency isn't worth very much, but you need to have some inflation. You can't really avoid that as the population expands and the economy expands. So I think vocabulary and language is kind of similar. We are going to evolve it, but you have to have enough stability to it that you can, that you can. I don't know. I'm looking at the clock here. I'm trying to
No, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I guess we should just wrap it up then. And Jordan, I don't know if you want to say anything before you go. Sorry if it went off the rails for a minute, but hopefully we can do this again sometime. And I do enjoy having you on. And again, I don't want to be too combative, but at the same time,
here's the but.
No, it's just it gets tricky when we get to have long conversations just on definitions. So I don't know. It just seems a little.
Well, it's a similar trap to what Peterson and Harris.
Good point, Jesse. Yeah,
we actually got to experience that whirlpool.
Yeah,
like actually.
But look how far they got. So well,
true.
Sam and Peterson.
Yeah,
in that first conversation.
Yeah. And then
that's what we're talking about.
Right. So anyway, I guess you got to go. Do you want to say anything before you go, Jordan?
No, I just say, I just want to plug this again because it's very similar to what the Facebook chat is about. But there's this organization called LetterWiki that I'm pretty close with the founders of it, and if anyone wants to have written conversations about more of the stuff that we talked about, they can write to me there. Just go on letter.wiki and then search for That's BS. And yeah, thank you to you guys for hosting again.
All right. So I don't know. Do we want to wrap it up, Jesse and Devin, or I guess Jordan's going to jump off. Do we want to go on at all, or?
Well, no. I guess we could wrap it up as far as I'm concerned.
Sure.
I'd be down.
So I can leave right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. It was good seeing you, Jordan.
Yeah. Good
to meet you. Thanks for having me talk with you.
Yeah, it was nice meeting you, Devin. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
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 All right.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.
Later.
We'll do it again, probably in about a week, and maybe with Jordan, maybe not, but we'll see. Hopefully, we'll see him around, and I'll definitely see you guys the next week or two.
Cool.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Good input and everything.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.